subscribing, and leaving comments.
Here we are. We are back at Area M4. I am Stammering Bonsai, and to my right,
I am Roy.
Yes, we have Roy.
I see our computer's back on crack or something again. Now, I was in studio again last month, I think it was.
Yeah, it was about a month ago you were here.
And we were in the middle of an interview, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, here come a commercial.
And it has not done that since you were here last. I think you are messing with the equipment.
I was over here on the other computer, IMing my wife.
Oh, boy.
So, I mean, come on. How could I do?
Like you have some kind of aura around you that computers just do not like.
Look,
that's why your computer at home doesn't work.
Look, I know I've been into Wicca, but that kind of witchcraft is not what I practice.
Okay, but what we do practice here are great interviews. And tonight, now, we are going to have a Mr. John Bindernagel. I think I am actually pronouncing it properly now. He is the author of North America's Great Ape, the Sasquatch. And let's get right to it. John, are you there?
Fine, thanks.
Ah, great. And you are sounding great. You are close to 4,000 miles away. You are in the northwest Canada island out in the middle of nowhere, just about.
Well, a ways from Florida, that's for sure, yep.
Yes. Well, I guess let's get right to it in terms of, for those folks out there that are tuning in that have not heard you on Art Bell or on some of the other shows that you have done, go ahead and give a tiny bit of background about yourself and what you do.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
No, I was saying, if you could give some information about yourself and like what you do to start out.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually a wildlife biologist, and actually a mainstream wildlife biologist, and the Sasquatch research has kind of taken over my life these last few years. And I guess what I've been concentrating on doing is trying to make a case, as much to my wildlife biologist colleagues as other people, that really this is not the bizarre subject that so many people seem to make it into. You know, I'm referring, of course, to the skunk ape in Florida as well. And my take is that we're really dealing with a fairly mainstream large mammal here.
Okay, and now that is something that I've always been very, very interested in. The fact that mainstream science, for some reason, refuses to accept a lot of the evidence that has been found so far. And since we're still finding all over the planet, more and more creatures. I mean, of course, insects and things like that. But we have found some other larger type mammals. So to me, the possibility of a large mammal on the North American continent still kind of like hiding out there, to me, is not unheard of. Why is it that mainstream science fights so hard against any possibility of there being a unknown large mammal here?
Yeah, well, you've raised a couple of good points there. Yeah, one I think is that, we're not about discovering the Sasquatch. I think it's been discovered. Thousands of people have seen them. Aboriginal people, Native people have described them. But why? That's right. Why are we resisting this so much? And that's intriguing me actually more than the biology of the animal now. We've had some kind of what I'd say a difficult sort of time with the media. The media, playing it safe, has tended to maybe not mock the Sasquatch or the Bigfoot, but has tended to ridicule it, treat it lightly. And as a result, my scientific colleagues, they don't want to touch this subject at all. They've really fled from it. And I think we're doing a disservice to the people who see them when we don't address this. But yeah, there's some definite problems with the Sasquatch in that I think, it being walking on 2 feet, looking somewhat like a human, we're a little bit afraid of where this might be taking us. I think we're a little concerned. People talk about it being maybe a missing link or something, kind of intermediate between apes and humans. There's some fear that, what this will tell us or where it will lead us.
Yeah. So I guess we can start with so from like what is known right now. What is the history of Bigfoot or Sasquatch, both in North America and in other parts of the world? Because I know it goes back to Indians here having seen it, and various other peoples in other parts of the world, tracing back hundreds, if not thousands, of years to sightings. What is the history of Bigfoot?
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, these other ones, like the most famous, of course, is the so-called abominable snowman or the Yeti from the Himalayas in Asia, and that's, I guess, it's better known in Europe. But we have so much more information on the North American Bigfoot or Sasquatch than on the Yeti. We've these thousands of sightings. We've got reports of what they eat and how they behave, and details of what they look like. And so I think we're much further ahead. Well, we should be further ahead with this one. Yeah, and there is also one in China. Mm-hmm. I think they call it the Yeren, the wild man, the Chinese wild man. There's a creature like this reported from Australia. They call it the Yowie, and there's some pretty good reports of it. So yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a lot to be done in this area, but I really think we should be further ahead with this one in North America here.
Of course, a big reason for a lot of the skepticism has been hoaxes. Because, some people, of course, will take anything and try to capitalize on it, even something that's real, and they'll try to, fake their own videos of UFOs or of whatever. What have been some of the hoaxes, and or some of the most common hoaxes?
Well, there was a hoax here in British Columbia some years ago when a human really was dressed in a monkey suit or a gorilla suit and crossed a highway in front of a bus. And everyone in the province here seems to know about that story. And so they've more or less decided that all Sasquatch reports are hoaxes. And it's unfortunate that, that one well-known hoax has kind of driven all the legitimate reports underground. And it's something we have to struggle with. And unfortunately, I guess the Sasquatch or Bigfoot does lend itself to hoaxes because, walking along on 2 feet as it does look very human-like. I don't hear about people pretending to be bears. They're probably afraid of being shot. But with the Sasquatch, it seems to be a safe thing yet. I really don't think there have been that many hoaxes, but I know there have been a few. And that certainly has harmed the situation. It makes people. It's an easy way out, I guess. It's a safe interpretation, safer than thinking that it could be a real creature.
Now, that one film that is shown again and again and again on most TV shows about this subject matter. The one that was, I think, was what, 68 or something like that.
Yeah, I think 1967, but right around then, yeah.
Yeah. Do you consider that film a authentic film, or?
Well, yeah. You see, those of us who really studied the Sasquatch accept that film as authentic. There's just a lot in that film about the way the creature moves, details of its anatomy. And we know a little bit about Roger Patterson, the fellow who made the film, and his partner Bob Gimlin. But it's been discredited so many times on so many television programs. I think it was on one called The World's Greatest Hoaxes. And the perception is that it's a person in a fur suit, where, in fact, that's almost definitely not the case. But we hardly ever raise it anymore as evidence just because it's got such a bad rap and such a bad reputation, which is too bad because a lot of the descriptions we hear, really do line up with that film, and it's really quite instructive. But it's one of these things about perception that people think it's a hoax, and now it's gotten to the point where we almost need a body to prove that the film is real rather than using the film as evidence.
Ah, I see. Now, if someone was to obtain a film, if someone was to like show you a film, all of a sudden, hey, like this film hasn't been seen yet, so on and so forth. What would be some of the things that you would look for to try and spot if it was a hoax or if it was the real deal?
Sorry, did you ask what we would look for to tell if it's real?
Yes.
I see. You know, it's interesting because a lot of people in my position don't like to give out that information just because it would tell someone how to make a false report. I don't have that, and in my book I actually have listed the characteristics of a Sasquatch. But it raises the point, that the older reports in some ways are more acceptable because people didn't know what to report. They just say what they've seen. Nowadays, you could go to the internet and you would know how to submit a report. But even that aside, I don't think that false reports are that common. But the points to look for. I mean, most people when they see a Sasquatch, they do assume it's a human at first. They see something walking upright on 2 feet, and then they see some things that are unhuman-like, and that is long arms, maybe reaching down as far as its knees, a short, thick neck, the kind of stooped posture, and the fact that it's totally covered with hair, usually uniform in color, usually dark. And when they think human, they're assuming it's wearing clothing, and then they see that it's the same, and they think, gee, is it wearing coveralls with a hood or something? And they just see that it's the hair right from the peak of the head right down to the heels or the sides of the feet, and they realize that, no, this is a coating of fur. This is not a human wearing clothing. So those are a couple things. And then if people see the face, it's got that ape-like, gorilla-like face with the flat nose and the outward-facing nostrils, deep-sunk eyes, thin lips, that sort of thing. And sometimes brow ridges above the eyes. And
now that was something because in most of the reports that I've read, it seems to vary very, very much in terms of the facial features. Some have said, that it's more ape-like, but some have said that the face looked almost human-like, but more not quite Homo sapien, but that it could pass for a Cro-Magnon or a like Neanderthal with lots of hair.
Well, the thing is when assuming this does exist, if you're living out in the woods,
right,
and you don't bathe, you don't shave, I mean, how's your face going to look after a year, 2 years of being out there? It's going to have that look, especially you.
Well, yeah, because I look like a Sasquatch already. I know. That's my assumed to be ex co-host. But yeah. So I mean, what are some of the other reports that some of the facial features seem to be more human and less ape?
Well, that's a good point. That's right. And there are, some of the reports suggest no, not ape-like at all, much more human-like. And the human-like aspect seems to be a nose that's kind of fleshy and protruding like the human nose as compared to the flat nose. One thing we seem to have, and if we do accept whether it's more human-like or more ape-like, it does seem to be a primate, which is a large group of monkeys, apes, and humans. And in primates, you get quite a lot of variation. Just as we can look around at other humans and see quite a lot of variation between different facial features and physical characteristics among humans. So, there is that possibility, and it's interesting because some of the reports I do hear from sort of your part of North America, down in the southeast there, down in Florida, this more human-like countenance, if you will. Mm-hmm. I've heard that, and I haven't examined that many reports from Florida, and maybe that's kind of a regional thing. And I'm certainly open to this idea that it may be more human-like. I think the main thing at present is that if we can agree that there is something out there that isn't been properly studied yet, and then eventually there'll be a specimen or some really good observations or another film, and we'll be able to decide whether it leans more towards apes or humans. And I think it's good to note these variations in the physical characteristics.
Now, would you possibly know what some of the oldest recorded sightings are? How far back they go?
Yeah, I've tried to dig up some of these, and there's a number of reports, and it's kind of Illinois, Pennsylvania, New York State, the kind of eastern U.S. of so-called wild men by settlers and early pioneers in the sort of mid-1800s and the late 1800s. And then as people settled further west, there were reports there. And in those days, they didn't know about apes, and so this creature was always called wild man because it did indeed resemble a wild man. You would, long hair, hair-covered body, hair streaming out the back. And then more recently, sort of after the 1900s, we started hearing more like reports of ape man and man-beast and descriptions like that, people trying to put some sort of a name on it that kind of described it in a way. But certainly the reports, as far as the Europeans settling in North America do go back to the 1800s, and then of course there's the Aboriginal reports, the Native Americans and Native Canadians who have descriptions of a creature like the Sasquatch in their myths and legends, and we've always had a problem deciding what is mythical and what is real, and on how much reality are the myths based on, and that's kind of a difficult subject to address. But certainly some of the very early reports from Native people seem to be the Sasquatch as well.
Now, we began talking about its general appearance, long arms, dark hair. If you were to see the basic Sasquatch, what would it be like? Its size, its color, the sounds, the smells. What would you be seeing?
Okay, well that's a good point. I didn't mention the size because normally the ones that are seen are quite huge. That's another thing that's kind of unhuman-like. 7 to 9 feet tall, with shoulders 3 feet wide, a chest that may be as deep through as it is wide, very powerful, very muscular. And when we hear these reports, most of them seem to be adult males, and it seems that it's the adult males that are roaming around that are most often observed. Occasionally females, some are described as females because either breasts are seen or the animal is carrying an infant in its arms, which and they suggest there's probably a female doing that. Others seem to be sort of like teenagers, tall and thin, rather lanky. And then, very unusually, but once in a while, small ones, about the size of a chimpanzee. And I just got one of those reports just the other day. So, and then you mentioned some of the other characteristics, the calls and the smell. And the smell, which only seems to occur in about 20% of the reports, when it does occur, it's often very, very powerful, and people are quite impressed and quite overwhelmed. And they describe it as a gagging odor or eye-watering in its strength, and it's just something way beyond the smell of bears or other mammals that we know. And the sounds are particularly interesting because more and more we get these reports of a screaming or wailing sound, and that's sort of the tip-off that there's something in the area that's unusual. And even people who understand or who know of the sounds of cougars and panthers, and certainly wolves and coyotes and owls and all the more normal wildlife, when they have a call that they describe as likely Bigfoot or Sasquatch, it's something that they say, whatever it was, it must have had the lungs of a horse, and it's just so powerful that it's quite impressive.
Now, I know in some areas, I've read that some of them seem to be shorter as a whole. Like in Florida, for instance, the skunk ape is usually sized at 5 or 6 feet, as opposed to in some other areas of the country where it's the 7, 8, 9 foot tall ones.
I see.
Could that be, I guess, like different species of the same genus, or where I mean, of course, since one moved further south, and to traipse through swamps, I guess being huge would not be good. So figure over the thousands of years of them, surviving down south. I guess the ones here evolved a bit different.
That's a very good point, and of course I don't know the answer, and we do hear up here as well. Sometimes the ones they're sort of short, 6 feet, and people would say, well, then that's within human range. But usually the breadth, the width of the creature suggests that it's not human at all. But there is a general rule among mammals that as you do go further north, they tend to be larger, and I think that would be a point, that whereas in the north here, the problem is to keep warm through a cold, hard winter, whereas down in the southern U.S., the problem is to keep cool through much of the year where it's quite hot, and that might favor a smaller-sized animal. So I think one day, some years down the road, when we have a greater sample size and people feel freer to come forward with reports, we might very well find what you're suggesting, that there are subspecies that are really somewhat different from each other, sort of across the continent, and maybe it will be smaller ones in the south.
On that note, we have to get to our first break. When we come back from the break, I want to get more into the smell, because I'm very curious of what could be causing that stench that so many people speak of and how intense it is. But of course, I'm talking about some of the feeding and some of the other practices that these creatures seem to do. So we will be right back after a short break right here on Area M4. And here we're back at Area M4. I am Stammering Bonsai, and to my right,
I'm Roy.
And we are talking with a Mr. John Bindernagel, the author of North America's Great Ape, the Sasquatch. We began the interview talking about the basics of it, some of the history, some of the places that it has been spotted, its size, its color. Like, one of the things though was the smell, and as John was saying, about 20% of the reports talk about this overwhelming smell, enough to make the eyes water. Now, my question, sir, was what could be making the smell? Is it just from the fur being unwashed, or some type of scent glands, a musk gland, like per se, to mark their area, so to speak?
Well, yeah, very interesting point. A lot of people have thought, it smells so bad, it's been rolling in a dead carcass, and one of the common descriptions of the smell is, rotting meat, something like that. But I'm inclined to think that it is a scent gland, partly because people will be on a beach or something, and there'll be no smell, and then suddenly there's this strong, totally overpowering smell. And, they sense that something is around, and it's causing the smell, and then the smell disappears again. Mm-hmm. And that's the way it comes and goes is what makes me think that the animal gives it off when it's either afraid or angry or tense for some reason. And I'm partly basing this on what I hear from, like, Diane Fawcett, who studied the mountain gorilla in East Africa, talked about what she called it a gagging fear odor that gorillas gave off. And I think that's the sort of thing it is. But that's a little bit speculative at this point, and I guess we can't really say.
Right. Well, since you are basically speculating that it is a great ape of some sort, what are the similarities to the great apes in Africa? To the Sasquatch, like you just brought up, how some of the apes there do a fear smell.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I didn't really, when I started writing the book in 1996, I took 2 years writing it. It was only at the end when I really had concluded that this really must be a great ape. And one of the things I mentioned, the long arms, and one of the characteristics of the great apes, like gorillas, chimpanzees, and orangutans, is that the arms are longer than the legs. whereas in humans, the legs are longer than the arms. And it appears that in the Sasquatch, the arms are indeed longer than the legs. One of the most amazing things I felt like about the great ape, well, there's the loud vocalization, the strong smell, and then there's reports of its behavior when it feels threatened. You know, there are reports of chest beating, reports of them throwing stones or rocks or chunks of wood at people, which is just what chimpanzees do, beating on trees, breaking branches, running back and forth. Just a lot of things that we see in the intimidation display of chimpanzees and gorillas. So I think it's the behavior. I mean, the thing, I guess it not only looks like an upright gorilla, it seems to behave like an upright gorilla as well. So at least I think that's a good working hypothesis. You know, I'm not so adamant, you know, as I could be, but I'm saying that, you know, if we're willing to think of it or as possibly a great ape, and then get into the great ape literature, then I think we start seeing these similarities, and that can help us actually interpret some of the reports we get.
Now, if it is possibly a variation of a great ape, well, we did have some people able to live amongst the apes and study them. Jane Goodall, and there were, you know, like others, like throughout the past 30 or 40 years. I guess this question starts going towards the aggressiveness of great apes and great primates. How safe would it be? I mean, I understand, especially in the wild, they are protecting themselves, their young, so on and so forth. But the eventual possibility of studying them the way we have studied some of the other great apes, is that, do you think that would be possible at some point?
Yeah, well, you know, it's very interesting. Like up here where I live, you know, we have grizzly bears on the mainland, and every once in a while, and it's not that uncommon, someone gets too close to a grizzly bear's cub or a grizzly bear's food, and that person is mauled and perhaps killed by a grizzly bear. We don't have any reports. Well, we have one report of a Sasquatch possibly killing a trapper many years ago in the 1800s. But in general, the Sasquatches or Bigfoot appears to be very benign, not an aggressive animal, not like grizzly bears. And so we haven't had to have a conservation officer or a game warden go out and shoot one, you know, anything like that. And that sort of kept it out of the public eye as well. And most of the reports, the Sasquatch is either walking away or just crossing the road or basically being very shy. But every once in a while, there are these reports and of one being aggressive, and that's when we get the stone throwing and the chest beating and strong smells. And it seems when humans get too close to a Sasquatch, maybe too close to a young one, maybe too close to its food, and then we get a certain amount of aggressive behavior.
Well, from what you've learned so far, again, going back to the other great apes, chimps seem to be more social animals in larger groups, as where orangutans are more solitary. What have you seen or learned so far about Sasquatch? Do they seem to be more solitary creatures, or do they have some type of a more social type structure?
Well, certainly most reports are just of a single individual Sasquatch. That's right. We have several reports, and I know of several fairly recent ones from British Columbia. One was where there were 2 adults and 2 young ones. There's a couple reports of females carrying young ones. Rarely groups of 5 or more, but in general, it's just solitary animals. And you mentioned the orangutan, and I think the orangutan is kind of the best model if we're looking for other animals, related animals that have the kind of social structure. And in the case of orangutans, males and females come together in what they call a consortship for breeding, and then the males go off and lead a solitary existence again, and then you just have the female and infants staying together. That seems to be what occurs in the Sasquatch generally. We don't have the big troops or like in gorillas and chimpanzees.
No. Now, that's probably a good thing for us, because I've seen many films of chimpanzees and how they group their societies, and they even have wars against other groups, it seems like, using sticks and rocks. And sometimes from some of the films I've seen, they can be quite vicious. So to me, the idea of a larger society of these large apes would be that would be scary. I mean, considering how powerful they can be. I mean, a standard silverback ape can rip a man to pieces if he so chose to, very easily. And now increase the size from the size of a silverback up to something the size of, an 8 or 9 foot tall Sasquatch. A human being would never stand a chance if he so chose to harm a person.
That's right. There are records of sort of demonstrations of strength by Sasquatch, not violent against humans, but cases of pushing a truck over or rolling, or actually lifting and throwing barrels of fuel down into a valley,
Wow.
Turning over trailers, that sort of thing, sometimes uprooting trees. So the strength certainly seems to be there, the capabilities for some pretty great damage, but it almost never directed against humans.
Yeah, because I was about to say, because the basic fuel barrel is 55 gallons, and 1 gallon of gas weighs about 8.5 pounds. So you're talking something in excess of 500 pounds that they're just picking up and tossing like nothing, which is, our strongest superlifters can just barely do that. And these creatures are just tossing them around like, just like it's nothing. As far as the sounds, you were talking about screams and the howls, but I also read in your book you were talking about other sounds like a teeth clicking.
Oh, yes.
How have those been? From the standpoint of the great apes and seeing how they vocalize and how they, speak per se back and forth between their hoots, their howlers, their hand signals back and forth. Has any research been done yet on the different sounds of the Sasquatch and what they may mean in terms of aggressive sounds, submissive sounds, the teeth clicking, what those might be?
I'd say that's an area where we haven't done as well as we could have. We have a lot of descriptions of sounds, but it's awful, what someone calls a scream, someone else calls a hoot or a whoop, and growls are a little different. And there's a few tape recordings, but not a lot. And excuse me, once again, we're stuck with descriptions, and it would be good, if, granted, most people don't carry a tape recorder around with them, but if we could get more tapes for comparison, then we could start, comparing, even like with the great apes, because there's some very loud vocalizations in the great apes, even gibbons, which are actually called a lesser ape, have this long, mournful calls, and this is the sort of thing that is occasionally reported. But there's quite a variety of calls reported and they're attributed to the Sasquatch mainly because they don't fit anything else. They're not cougars, wolves, owls, that sort of thing. On the other hand, excuse me, some of the people who study Bigfoot and Sasquatch are not familiar with the other calls and occasionally make a mistake. So we really need tape recordings so then we can, they can go to biologists or good birders and kind of eliminate everything else and then build up a repertoire of Sasquatch calls.
I know I lived out west for a while, out in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado and Wyoming. And one of my first ventures into camping out in the middle of the far woods, way up in the hills, I was with a friend of mine that was from there, and I heard what sounded to me like a woman being raped. This screaming sound, and he said that it was just the elks, and they were in their rut at the time. And I was wondering if you've heard that sound before. Is that similar to what it sounds like for a Sasquatch a scream, or is it something completely separate from that?
I think it's different. Like I know what you're referring to. The whistling of a rutting elk can be is quite a powerful call as well. I've never really heard. I mean, they do talk about whistling. I sense that it's more of a shrill whistling, a clearer whistling than the elk, but I really don't know. And I think I just think that that's a case where it would be good to build up a collection of taped sounds, and then one could say, okay, this is obviously an elk, and you can get lots of elk hunters and who would confirm that, and then other calls that say, no, this is definitely not an elk, not a coyote, not a wolf, and then we could be getting somewhere. So it's an area where I think we need more documentation by way of tapes.
Okay. Now, I guess my next question was going to lead towards, as you spoke before, the quote-unquote missing link aspect of it. Since some of them do look more human than others, I personally tend to believe in the theory that it is simply a great ape that has evolved here on this side. But what would some of the possibilities be, though? Of course, we'd have to get it and check its DNA and yada, 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 but that's like far on down the line. But of it being closer to us than to the apes.
Yeah, well, this is where we really do need a specimen or a carcass or a captive one or just some very close observations. The DNA, a lot of hair has been found, and people have thought this is Sasquatch hair, and sure, some of it's turned out to be bear, but other has turned out to be sort of no known animal, close to human, close to orangutan, that sort of thing, and as you know, the DNA, the amount of the DNA between sort of chimpanzees and humans, the difference is not as great as we used to think. We share about 98% or something like that, maybe only 95%, but there's just not a whole lot of room in there, when you figure in error, and presumably the Sasquatch is going to be somewhere in there too, maybe between chimpanzee and human, and I'm not quite sure how this is going to unfold. That's why I guess I'm thinking this is where the museum people say we need bones or something to really know what we're talking about here. In the meantime, I guess we just have to work with descriptions, and I collect eyewitness drawings, and they're accumulating. Now, and what we do have is quite a large collection of plaster casts of tracks. Mm-hmm. And in a way, they're part of the problem, because if you've ever seen the tracks of a Sasquatch, they're more human-like than ape-like, with the big toe lined up with the other toes,
and the
rather than sticking out to the side as it does in apes. So I do understand, this problem we're having, saying, which way is it going to go? And then when people say, it looks like the missing link, well, that's kind of a hot-button language, and it gets a lot of people really upset, but it is part of our dilemma that it does seem to fit in there somewhere between apes and humans, and we're going to have to deal with it someday.
Now, what do you think I'm not sure if it's your field, but what would you think the sociological impacts would be if we did find that it was actually much closer to us than to apes, that it was more human than ape-like?
Yeah, well, I think I think that's a good way to put it. The sociological impact. I think it's going to be quite powerful, because already we humans are rather uncomfortable with like, say, chimpanzees. I can remember when I was young, entertainers used to dress up chimpanzees and teach them to smoke and ride roller skates, and we'd kind of get a laugh out of them as poor imitations of humans. And we were just very uncomfortable with apes. They just looked too human-like, and kind of bothered us because, gee, we looked like we really are related to these creatures, and we're not. A lot of us aren't very comfortable with that, and it's got a lot better. With the work of Diane Fossey and Jane Goodall, and they found out, that apes, like chimpanzees in the wild, show compassion and grief and altruism. They help each other a lot, and we're starting to have a little better opinion of apes, and that's good, because I think apes do have a lot of sensitivity and feeling, and they're, a lot of the characteristics that we used to think were strictly human. And of course, one of the problems with the Sasquatch is that it walks on 2 feet like a human, so it's even more human-like than the other apes in that regard. So, I do think now, as I've been studying this now, it's been over 30 years, and I have a very hard time getting my papers published and my ideas, opportunities to speak at conferences, and we're just kind of afraid of this whole area. It's very disturbing. And I think part of this is sociological. We just wish it would go away. At least that's what I sort of think.
Well, unfortunately, it's not going to go away as human beings encroach more and more into the wild. Not passing a judgment if that's good or bad, but just the fact that we are, expanding and we are, encroaching further into the wild. At some point, I believe in the very, very close future, we are going to be confronted with this to our faces. They are not going to be just these sporadic sightings here and there. It's going to come to a head where we come face to face with it in a big way, and I think at that point we're going to have to start to think of also like what intelligence level do they have? I think it's what the chimpanzee has the about equivalent of a 3-year-old human.
Yep, yeah, something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, we'd have to figure out if this creature is more intelligent than that. I'm not saying a Einstein, but let's say of a 6 or 7-year-old child, or you know what I mean. A bit higher intelligence. Then if we find that it is more human than ape and it has a higher intelligence than even chimps, where does it fall in terms of its rights, in terms of human rights per se? I'm not saying the right to vote and that kind of stuff, but I mean to be hunted or to be studied and so on and so forth. At some point, there may be large questions of what can we do in terms of studying it. What do we not allow to be studied on humans? Well, then are we going to allow that to be done to them? Yeah.
Well, you raised some very good points there. You may know of a project called the Great Ape Project, where a number of zoologists have talked about this very thing, rights for great apes. And certainly Jane Goodall, her recent work has gone away from studying wild chimps to the rights of chimpanzees used in medical research and their entitlement to better facilities, more rooms, some stimulation, and some sort of play things for their psychological well-being while they're in captivity, to their retirement in areas where, they can have a reasonable kind of sunset years, that sort of thing. And so this is certainly a change that's happening, certainly in my lifetime, that sort of thinking. Then this whole thing, like say hunting and killing of animals, years ago, for museums, they collected a specimen. If you wanted to declare a new species, they went out and they basically shot one. Well, now we're faced with this thing about the Sasquatch, and the museum says, well, until we have bones or a carcass, we're not going to accept this thing. And most of us are saying, well, no, it shouldn't be necessary to have a carcass. We should be able to move ahead at least somewhat based on the eyewitness descriptions and the many tracks that have been photographed and cast. But we're in this dilemma because they will not accept that evidence, saying it's insufficient, yet no one really wants to advocate shooting one. And I don't know what's going to finally solve it. Maybe a road kill or a road injury or something like that. But yeah, we have this very definite ethical kind of dilemma as how we're going to move ahead with this.
Now, I guess one other question then would also be, well, I mean, we have taught chimps how to do many, many things, and even sign language for some of the for some of the other great apes, which to me is not just a trick. I mean, it's some of the apes that they have taught sign language to have then created their own words, and they can communicate with their trainers fluently. I mean, it's amazing some of the films that I've seen and some of the things that I've read. So I guess then that takes us to the point. If they are more intelligent than the other apes, which is a possibility, and we can teach the other apes basic sign language and communicate with some of them, and they even showed where some of the apes that have had offspring, the apes have actually taught the offspring at least some of the signs. Then I guess the next step could be possible, even some form of simple communication, even if we were to finally capture one or have one in captivity for some reason. Especially if they are more intelligent. If ape, that has the intelligence of a 3-year-old child can learn sign language and communicate at least simple concepts like with its trainer, what could a great ape like Sasquatch with the intelligence of a 6 or 7-year-old child learn?
Yes, I think it may be something of a humbling experience when we finally get to understand this animal a bit more. Already we have reports of human children playing with young Sasquatches, and of course when that's reported, most adults say, that's impossible, how can that have happened? But there'll be a Sasquatch report maybe on someone's farm or ranch or something, and the child will say, oh yes, I've been playing with the young one. And that's come up 2 or 3 times now. And I have a couple reports from remote situations where children have been raised in the bush, and there's been some kind of rapport between usually an immature Sasquatch and an adolescent human being. And these are just anecdotal reports. We don't know quite what to make of them, but it suggests that Sasquatches, when they say humans, recognize some sort of kinship. And certainly we humans, when we see Sasquatches, recognize that kinship. When I think of the number of reports where hunters here in Canada have seen Sasquatches and just were simply unable to pull the trigger, just couldn't conceive of actually shooting one. They for one thing, they thought they'd be up on a charge of manslaughter. Second, they just wouldn't shoot something that looks that human-like. And we do recognize that sort of kinship. Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. Well, we definitely have to get to our next break here. After the break, I'd like to come back and find out what they eat. Their feeding practices and other things like that. So maybe like with bears, we've, learned if we're out with, in an area where there are bears, you don't leave certain food out because it can attract them, so on and so forth. So we'll go with that after this short break right here on Area M4. Oh, yes, we're back here at Area M4 right here on M4Radio.com. We are talking tonight with John Bindernagel, the author of North America's Great Ape, the Sasquatch. Now, you can follow along on his website, which is www.bigfootbiologist.com. And there's some very, very interesting photographs there. And on the main page, especially, it shows a comparison of Sasquatch and human footprints. And honestly, it looks very, very human. I mean, with some of our very own professional basketball players that have these huge size 16 and 17 feet, except for being a bit wider, I could easily see that as being just a huge human foot, which is very scary in a way. The fact that they could be that close to us human wise. Now we can get back with John. We were talking before the break about a more esoteric possibility that if they have a higher intelligence than chimps. Let's say, what rights do they have? Can they be taught sign language? And if so, and we actually eventually have a dialogue like with them, do we find that they have a culture of their own? And at what point, what intelligence level does culture start? John was saying that certain scientists now are saying that even chimps may have a quote-unquote culture. Can you expound upon that, sir?
Well, it's very interesting because since I've sort of got thinking about the Sasquatch as a great ape, I've started reading the great ape literature, and I find that there's a discussion going on in the International Journal of Primatology about between several scientists who've been studying chimpanzees, and apparently chimpanzees in East Africa do this technique of termite fishing, whereby they stick a branch or a piece of grass into a termite mound, withdraw it with the termites attached, and eat it. But they don't know how to crack open certain nuts. Where in West African chimpanzees, there's none of that termite fishing, but there's they use a method of a hammer and an anvil, basically two rocks, to crack open certain nuts. And so the primatologists are making the case that these are two different cultures, and which have two different methods of feeding and different techniques. And some are saying, no, this is not enough of a difference, or it's not enough, the feeding habits aren't enough to call it culture. But it's an interesting discussion because it makes us question, just what is culture. And I'm curious, like when we mentioned food habits and things, the Sasquatches in Florida may live quite differently from Sasquatches here in the Pacific Northwest and up in Canada. And these could be, in fact, cultural differences.
Yeah, because up in Canada, the most that they would have to deal with in terms of a possible danger besides man may be grizzly bears, mountain lion, maybe packs of wolves. Now here in the South, about the only quote unquote like predator besides man, I think that the skunk ape down here might have to deal with is like gators. Which I mean they're pretty bad anyways. I mean, but in any of your research, have you found any evidence of how can I say this? Of what a Sasquatch would consider its own danger. I mean, something that could harm him, except for human beings, of course. But I mean, in the wild, would they have to be like protected from bears, or do the bears just kind of ignore them and leave them alone?
I only have one report of that, and that's to do with a grizzly bear up here, and that's the story of a trapper who was actually crossing a creek, and he's in the middle of a creek, and suddenly a grizzly bear comes out of the forest running towards him. As he raises his rifle, the grizzly bear rushes by, and the Sasquatch comes out of the bush. It's chasing the grizzly bear. So, based on that story, the Sasquatch takes precedence over a grizzly bear and puts it on the run. But that's just the only story I've ever heard where the Sasquatch and the grizzly bear are sort of having any kind of relationship.
Right. But that would definitely scare me. If something can scare away a grizzly bear, then you've got to be one bad dude. Now, as for feeding, are they herbivores? Are they omnivores? Are they carnivores?
Yeah, actually, we've got quite a few reports of food habits, and it seems to be omnivore. A lot of people think, because this thing looks a lot like a gorilla, it's going to be totally vegetarian like a gorilla. And indeed, there are a lot of items of vegetation reported. They've been reported digging for roots. They've been seen stripping leaves off willow trees. I'm trying to think of some of the other food habits, leaves, sometimes grass, but there's a lot of meat items that seem to show up, and certainly on the coast here up in British Columbia, they've been seen digging for clams quite a number of times, in Washington and Oregon digging for ground squirrels, actually hibernating ground squirrels in the rocks in the mountains, occasionally catching deer, both fawns and adults, and certainly stealing fish from fish camps, particularly from native people, drying fish, and also stealing carcasses from hunt camps, from hunters, elk carcasses, deer carcasses hanging up, that sort of thing. So once we start understanding that they eat meat as well as vegetation, it helps certainly to understand how they might get through the Canadian winters up here, which would be quite a problem.
Oh, yes. Well, yeah, because I know most of the great apes are herbivores, but I've read things that I think it's certain species of chimp sometimes have actually been shown not only to eat meat, but also to have practiced, at least in fighting, to practice a form of cannibalism.
Yeah, that's right. That was an interesting finding. That was Jane Goodall's work and some of the people she worked with. That chimpanzees actually do hunt antelopes and bush pigs and colobus monkeys and eat quite a lot of meat. Yeah, so that was quite interesting because that wasn't known until relatively recently. So it's interesting that at least one of the known great apes it seems to eat a fair amount of meat and hunts. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, going back to human beings, though, supposedly they've found fairly recently that the reason why we evolved such a large brain capacity was because we went from being a more strictly berry and root eating creature to when we began to eat meat on a larger basis, like once it became a larger basis of our diet, it increased, of course, our intake of protein, so on and so forth, which over time, that's what jumped our brain capacity. So that's where I'm thinking, again, the chimps seeming to be, as intelligent as they are, and they do eat, some meat. Now, if the Sasquatch again is a omnivore and does eat a large amount of meat in its diet, that is one more reason why I think it could be at least as intelligent, if not more intelligent, than the chimps and such. Simply because, for the same reason that we jumped and left the foal and our brain capacity increased and we got smarter, was because of our meat eating habits. Finally, that the same thing could be with the Sasquatch.
Yeah, quite possibly. Good point. Mm-hmm.
So now, in terms of being aggressive towards man, you've said so far that there's been very few reports at all of attacks on man. Now, there is one story. I don't remember the time frame. All I can remember was it was in a logging camp, I believe. It was either a hunting camp or a logging camp. And one of the members of the camp shot and killed a Sasquatch. And of course, he was afraid. He didn't know if he was going to get in trouble, just like you said, because they seem so human. That when that night he was trying to tell his friends like what he saw, and they're like, "Yeah, right, you're crazy. Stop drinking," kind of thing. And as they were inside the cabin that night, the other Sasquatches came and basically attacked the cabin, and they survived by firing their guns and finally scaring them off. But have you heard that story as well?
Yeah, that's actually, they call it the Ape Canyon story. They were miners, actually.
Oh, miners, okay.
In that log cabin, that's right. But otherwise, it's just as you told it, that's right. They apparently had killed one, and there was some retaliation by the others.
And to me...
And it's interesting, it's in that report when they started thinking back, saying, now, what had we seen here the previous week? And they had heard some loud vocalization from one ridge to another, and they had heard a sound, it said, like something thumping itself, beating itself on the chest or something. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, because that's the earliest report of chest beating that I'd read. I think it's back around 1925. So that was kind of interesting, yeah.
And to me, that shows not only a intelligence, but also a societal culture, because with most other animal species, the only time that a animal will attack you is if they're protecting, their young or themselves. But
that's a good point. Yeah.
But once you are out of the area of conflict, they don't go hunting you down. You know what I mean? So,
right.
So this looked like to me revenge or a retaliation, showing a cognitive decision to, okay, he killed one of ours, let's go kick their butts. Which again, that shows me that they have more intelligence, and not just intelligence, but reasoning facilities, and more of a cohesive culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's a very good point. Yeah, and a good observation.
So, I mean, I wish I lived in the certain areas where I could actually study like these things more. I mean, like I said, I'm no scientist. I'm just a host on a talk show.
Yes.
But these are some things that I've, in my own research from the past 16 years of researching all forms of the paranormal, from magic to psychics to UFOs, and then with things like Sasquatch, just it seems to me like many scientists seem to miss the forest because of the trees. They tend to become so specific on one item of their of what they're trying to learn and study, that they don't put the other parts together. And I mean, I can understand why, because they are scientists. They're very focused. They have to be focused. But it takes sometimes a non-scientist to step back and say, okay, now, but this and this and this all kind of seems to work together, but how? And that's why I'm saying, once we finally do confront these creatures and start to have to cohabitate on a much closer type level, I think we are going to find that they aren't too far behind us. And I mean, now, yeah, we could be playing God at some point in terms of uplifting them per se, if that was possible. But just the fact that they show intelligent reasoning and forethought, because again, most animals seem to they don't have a sense of the future per se. If they're gathering food for the upcoming winter, I don't see that as, in most animals, as a thought of the future. It's just instinctual. They gather food at this time of the year. But a animal that can show actual cause and effect.
Yeah. Actually, you touched on another very good point there. That scientists aren't studying this. We're in this dilemma where, all the work being done on the Sasquatch is being done by untrained investigators, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it because scientists refuse to examine this, and then other people have come in to fill the vacuum. And it's kind of an awkward situation, because scientists, who have the training and the background to do a really good job, won't do the job, so it's fallen to people who aren't trained, and sometimes the work isn't done as well as it should be, but it's not their fault, because it's not their job. So we're in this very awkward situation where, and I'm sure that there are people in some parts, I've heard of reports even from the Florida coast, where people are seeing Sasquatches on a regular basis, and could be, in fact, carrying on quite a good study. And it would be nice if we could sort of combine, some scientific training and the people who really are know what's going on in the field. But it's just it's one of the things that I think is holding us back, and I blame it on the scientists for not being more open to this.
Now, are there any estimates? I mean, considering how seldom they are actually seen, are there any kind of estimates at all at the possible actual number out there, the populations?
No, that's another interesting area. Like here in the West, a colleague of mine who died recently, Dr. Grover Krantz, who was at Washington State University, he suggested I think over about 2,000 for Western North America, west of the Rockies, just as a ballpark figure. And a lot of people said, "Oh no, that's way too high." Yet I have another colleague who says, "Well, if anything, that might be a bit low." And it's this dilemma of how many sightings actually become reports in our files. Like if we have sort of between 2,000 and 3,000 reports in our database, what percentage of this is this of the sightings that have actually been made? I would guess it's only about 1%, because the way I see things and when I talk to people is that they're very reluctant to come forward with reports. And so basically, I guess what I'm leading up to is that however many there are, I think they're more common than we currently think. But we won't know until we start taking it more seriously and creating a situation where it's okay and it's safe to come forward with a Sasquatch report or a Bigfoot report. So numbers, I'd hate to make a guess at numbers.
Now, from a genetic viability standpoint, for any species, what is the bottom level of numbers needed to keep a species genetically viable, so they don't start inbreeding, so bad that it causes bad mutations and so on and so forth?
Yeah, I don't know if there are actual numbers. Certainly, more is better. That's right. It's nice not to go to very low numbers. That's a good question, and I really would only speculate as to numbers. I think what we're probably dealing with is discontinuous populations and pockets here and there, and the question is, do Sasquatches, from one population actually interbreed with those from another? That I don't know that. It does seem that the males do roam to a fairly large extent, and maybe they're able to kind of keep genes mixing from one of these pockets or subpopulations to another, but it's pretty hard to say.
Yeah, because they could very possibly breed like some of the animals where when the male, a teenager, per se, the young, once it reaches a certain age, it breaks off from the family unit, from the societal unit, and goes off solitary to start its own troop, tribe, societal unit, however you term it, and in that way, keeping the genes going from area to area, because
But that's quite a common thing in mammals. From mountain goats to moose and deer, that it's the young males that seem to wander and go and sort of carry the genes to other populations or other subpopulations. Mm-hmm.
Same thing like with us humans, but and that seems to cause a problem sometimes. But let me see. Well, some of the other signs, of course, signs in terms of evidence. We've had the footprints, we've had hair samples. Have there been any dropping samples that have been found yet?
Sorry, what samples?
Any droppings?
Dropping scat. Yeah. That's a tough one. It would be good in areas where there's no bears, because then I think you'd be sure about what you're dealing with. Up here, I think when everyone sees a really large scat sample, they assume it's a bear or maybe a grizzly bear. But we have these descriptions of some rather large scat samples, droppings, like a bucket full and, long cabled stools, and that's, it's just very, very large human, only out in some remote area that may well be a Sasquatch. But again, and I suppose, I'm told that one could get DNA from samples like this, but it would have to be handled properly and gotten to a lab fairly quickly or frozen.
And there have been handprints found as well. We hear about footprints all the time, but handprints.
There's been a few handprints and knuckle prints. I know from eastern Washington, there's a couple of handprints I've seen that that look pretty interesting, were handprints. There's one other form of sign that's very intriguing, and it's something I mentioned earlier. I was down in Texas at a conference earlier this year, and they talk a lot down there about twist-offs, and these are saplings or branches that are broken and twisted. And I've seen photographs of these from the American Midwest. I've seen them from here in the Pacific Northwest, and they seem to find a lot of them down in the Southeast. And it seems to be the case where maybe a Sasquatch is walking through an area, and I don't know if it's through tension or what, but it grabs these saplings and bends them downward and twists them around. And I have a sample here, and I'm wanting to get some foresters to look at it because, people might dispute this kind of sign, but it does seem to be something that's not caused by natural phenomena like wind and rain and that sort of thing, or by other animals, and it may indeed be a form of Sasquatch sign that we're starting to recognize.
Uh-huh. Now, one more thing. I know that certain primates, as in the orangutan, they build nests.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, I've heard reports of nests. I've never seen one, and I've never seen good photographs. But that's right. But I have heard a description, and again, it was an area where there were bears, and the biologist who found this nest decided that this was not something that a bear would do, and it's a nest that actually had a little bit of a rim, of weaving, branches woven around the outside, and it had a few branches arched over the top as well. So this would be quite something if we could come up with some kind of nest construction that could be attributed to the Sasquatch and be something that really isn't done by any other animals.
Right, yeah, because I was about to say about the only other ones that I know of that build any type of a nest is the weaver bird. That actually weaves its own little like hanging basket kind of nest. But again, that is more instinctual. They aren't taught. I mean, like one can be hatched and not ever see its kind, and it just makes one anyways. As where with the apes, it's a taught skill. They've seen the older apes teaching the young ones. They learn by example. So
it'd be very. That's the thing. If we started finding nests, that would be really interesting. And again, I've heard descriptions, but never seen good photographs yet.
So, in your opinion, what needs to be done for us to get better observations? I mean, I know, like you've said, scientists have to take it more seriously. But if someone out there that is not a scientist, though, but that wants to go out there and try and get good film footage or a good photograph, not go there and try and harm it, but just get some good evidence. How would he go about starting? I mean, where are some of the more common places, and what kind of things would he look for to try and track one?
Well, in the last couple of years, some reports have come forward of people actually living on acreages and knowing that they have Sasquatches on their land and putting food out and actually building up a little bit of rapport, it seems, with them. There's a report like this from a situation in California, and there's one in Texas, there's one in one of the eastern states, I think it's Carolina, and from what I hear, it's usually women, which is kind of interesting, and this goes back to the thing about the great people who studied apes were Jane Goodall and Diane Fossey and Brudy Galdicus. The fact that women don't seem to antagonize apes maybe as much as men do.
Right.
But there haven't been successful photographs yet, and sometimes it's just a matter of finances and funding, and sometimes it's a matter of sort of expertise, and it's just a case of someone in a situation like that who really does have evidence that they have Sasquatches on their land, hooking up with someone else who can come and do maybe the photography or something. And I think this may not be quite as uncommon as we think. This may be happening just from stories I hear, that there are other people who know where there are families maybe of Sasquatches living. But it's a matter of combining that knowledge with photographic equipment and skills.
No. Okay, well, like we have to get to our last break of the show, and when we come back, I want to go to the question that a lot of people have been popping up on the screen screen to me is, what is the best course of action for people that do encounter a Bigfoot? And we'll talk about that after this short break right here on Area M4.
M4 Radio.
And we're back here, Area M4. How you guys doing out there? We've been talking tonight with a John Bindernagel. Okay, I know I'm going to slaughter that name at least once tonight. I'm terrible with names, but it is an excellent, excellent book. I encourage any of you out there to look for the book. It's called North America's Great Ape, the Sasquatch. It's been put out by Beachcomber Books, and if you go to his website, I believe you can find out some more about it right there. That's bigfootbiologist.com. And there's some great photographs in there and a ton of information as well. So please go to that site and check it out and try to get yourself one of the books. If you're interested in this, as I am, it is a great, great read. Now, the question we posed right before we left for the break, which would be the last real question of the show, is what is the best course of action for people that may encounter a Bigfoot in the wild? And I'll pose it two ways. One, if you are actively searching for one, what should you do to try and authenticate your sighting? And number two, if you're not actively searching for one and it just kind of happens upon you, should you stop, drop, and roll? Should you run? Should you just, scream in terror? So we'll take it from there, John. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, those are good questions. I guess the main thing, the problem is, if you saw a bear or something, you'd go home and you'd tell people, and they'd say, "Oh, right on, that's great," and maybe local Fish and Game would be interested in it, a government agency. With a Sasquatch, it's a whole different thing. You don't know who you should tell. And I guess what I'm thinking is that one of the best places nowadays, there's a website of the BFRO, the Bigfoot Research Organization, and I'm affiliated with them, and it's a group who does a very good job it's on the internet, and I think it's bfro.net, but I'm not sure, of documenting and cataloging these reports. And and you don't have to give your name. It's nice if you do, but you don't want to. Everyone understands why you might not want to do that. And the other thing is to have as complete a description of what you saw as you can have. And certainly if you can get some pretty close to physical evidence, if you can photograph tracks, or certainly if you can photograph the creature, or make a plaster cast of the track, or collect some hair, something like that, because it's very hard. Those of us trying to, introduce or address the subject at the scientific level and get our colleagues interested, we need some kind of evidence. And they're always interested. If there's a good plaster cast of a track, well, that certainly makes any other part of the report more credible. So it's always a dilemma, this documentation. As I mentioned earlier, tape recordings of the calls is just essential, because then, the calls can be checked and people say, oh, that's an owl or that's a coyote, and that's fine. It's not a bad thing. It's good to get these things straight. But without some kind of, like the tape or something, it's pretty hard to go anywhere with just descriptions. So I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Well, okay, yeah. On the side of if you're trying to authenticate it, now, how about if you accidentally happen upon one and you startle it and it startles you? I mean, I know, like with a bear, they tell you you're not supposed to run because that basically trips off its hunting mode. You're supposed to actually stand your ground, raise your arms, and the bear will usually back off unless there's a cub there or something like that. When dealing with a Bigfoot, if you and he surprise each other, how should you should you just freeze? Should you? What should the person do to not cause it to become aggressive?
Yeah. Well, good question, and I'm not sure I have a good answer because I don't know. First of all, I think you might just act instinctively, in which case most people do run. And I think running from a Bigfoot is probably not a bad idea. I think it'd be great if you could stay and get a good look and make some strong mental notes about physical features and hair color and that sort of thing, but I'm not sure that many of us would have the presence of mind to do that. It might depend partly on what the animal is doing. I've heard reports where it suddenly opens its mouth and screams at you with just an ear-splitting scream, and you basically either drop in your tracks or run, whether you can, through no choice of your own. So I don't know that running's such a bad thing. I know one report where a female chased a fisherman, a sport fisherman, alongside a river in Oregon, and the fisherman tripped and fell. The Sasquatch stopped, let the fisherman get up, and then continued the chase. But only so far as that the Sasquatch was satisfied that the fisherman had left the area, right there.
Right.
And this is the whole thing about a chase, is that the animal wants you to leave. It doesn't want to catch you and eat you. It just wants you to leave. And then that's the whole thing about the stone throwing, the chest beating, and usually we get the idea and do leave. But I don't know if it's I know what you're saying about in the case of predators. We are not to run. It triggers an instinct in certainly in cougars and wolves and bears and that sort of thing. I don't know about Sasquatches, actually.
Well, I guess the only thing that we could equate it to possibly is, what have the researchers found amongst the great apes when someone has accidentally come across a silverback, let's say?
Yeah, that's a good point. Like we hear about the bluff charges of the silverback the silverback gorillas, that they rush at people. They almost never complete the charge. They might cuff the person at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's a case of maybe standing your ground, eh?
Yeah, that could be. Although 9 foot tall and extremely large and smelly, I don't know. I mean, I'm a pretty big guy myself, but I think in that instance, I'd become a child, a screaming girl, just ah. But well, thank you so much, sir. This has been a great interview. Is there? Well, I mean, in this like last bit, feel free to tell the people out there how they can contact you if they have sightings and they want to send you information, or how they can contact you to like get books or more information for themselves.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, you mentioned the website, so I'm glad you did that. I've set up this website called BigfootBiologist.com, and it's kind of an informational website, and I've information on the book there as well. And I have an email address. It's basically John B, JOHNB, at island.net, island as in Vancouver Island. And I'm always glad to hear reports and interested in answering questions. If anyone wanted to order the book, we've got a toll-free order number. It's a 1-800 number, 1-800-487-1494. And yeah, so that's it for me. And I've enjoyed the conversation very much.
Thank you, sir.
And you've given me a lot to think about. Some very good questions, some very good comments. So I'll be thinking a lot more and reading a lot more.
Well,
and I remain very interested in the U.S. Southeast and Florida in particular, with the skunk ape and the swamp monkey, and be interested to know one day just is it different from Bigfoot in the rest of North America, or is it much the same?
Exactly. Well, please, if you find out anything new, feel free to contact me either by phone or by email, because I am, truly interested in learning more as well, and I'd like to, if I could, in any way, help you out and learn alongside of you, because to me, that's why we're here on this planet, is to learn, to find out, to explore, and to broaden our mental horizons. Thank you, sir.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Lance.
Have a great night.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
Wow, that was an awesome interview. I mean, there's just a wealth of information there. Now, he was talking about the BFRO website, the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, and I found the site while he was talking there, and it's got a way that you can see the different sightings from all over the place. And I just did a let's check Florida. I checked Florida, and let's see what counties. There have been some sightings here in Osceola County.
Well, look where you're talking about, man. It's Kissimmee, okay,
Right.
for one. It's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
To get out here, you drive through all kinds of nothing.
Oh, it's not that bad.
Oh, man, you get on the Florida Turnpike from I-4 to drive out to your house. It's only 10 miles. You see one building, and it's the toll booth, dude.
Well, here, the most recent one that has been reported was May of 99. That was in the spring of 99. That was May 21st, actually. It was just outside of St. Cloud, Florida, in the woods out by Holopaw. Observed on May 21st, 1999, I was out in the woods in St. Cloud, Florida, armadillo hunting with a few friends. My good friend and I wandered off by ourselves and were exploring. As we were walking through the woods, we saw what seemed to be an extremely hairy creature. It stood about 7.5 feet tall. It must have weighed between 350 and 400 pounds. It walked slowly with its arms hanging low and a hunched over back. My friend and I stood in amazement as the creature slowly turned and stared at us for approximately 4 seconds, then turned back in its original direction and continued walking until it was out of sight. My friend and I quickly ran away and found the others and told them about our sighting. Most did not believe us. So, see, I mean, right there, and that's even right here. That's no more than about that area that they're talking about. It's about 20, maybe 25 miles east of here. And
Well, what about Volusia?
Okay, let's take a look at Volusia County. Let's go back here.
Now, for people that don't know, Volusia County is the world's most famous beach. It's Daytona Beach.
Right.
But also included in that is redneck towns of DeLand.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here. You get south of Port Orange, there's pretty much nothing. You get north of Ormond Beach, there's pretty much nothing. So it's surrounded by rednecks.
Well, here they have a Class A sighting, spring of '89, by two newspaper delivery men about 3:30 a.m. This was the spring of '89 by Oak Hill, Florida, in Volusia County. The nearest road was Maytown Road. Observed a large, hairy, ape-like humanoid standing in the middle of a dirt road at approximately 3:30 a.m. The creature was sighted in the headlights of the witness's pickup truck. As the witnesses stopped their truck, the creature began to approach them. The middle part of the creature was closely observed in the headlights and confirmed not to be a bear or any known animal. Both witnesses reported a sickening odor that smelled like cabbage. The smell was so overwhelming that one of the witnesses began to gag. This report was never reported to the authorities or to the media. The information was first made available to the researcher in 1995. On State Road 520, there have been several reports through radio talk shows of a Bigfoot-like creature like running at cars from the side of the road. Those were in 93 and 94. Let me see, and I think I saw one other one here too for Volusia County. It was a Class B. I guess a Class B is not a sighting; it's sound. Loud vocalization sounds woke up a sleeping couple, and a family dog was found injured. The first incident happened in fall of '98. The witnesses were sleeping around 10 p.m. when they were awakened by two loud vocalizations. The first was more of a loud growl. The second started low and progressed to higher pitches and sounded like a scream. The witnesses related that it sounded as if whatever made the sound was standing in the room with them. It was so loud. They said that they could feel it. The husband got up to investigate but found nothing. He said that his two dogs were very scared. They could not move from where they were laying in the house. The husband stated that I could not have pried them off the floor with a spatula. The second incident occurred October of '99. The wife let the dogs out that morning. The dog involved did not return as she usually does, so the wife went out to look for her. At the bottom of the front steps, she found the dog bleeding from the stomach area. The wife took the mixed breed dog to the vet. The vet stated that the dog had been hit by something big, such as a car or something. The witness said that the dog never went to the street, which was approximately 200 yards from the house. The dog weighed about 25 pounds. The injuries included massive internal injuries and an 1.5 inch cut on her stomach. The vet said it was a puncture wound of some sort. Also that the dog's rib was broken. Unfortunately, the dog died. The witness believes that the dog walked up on a Bigfoot and was kicked by the creature. The cut on her stomach could have been where its toenail had, like a poked her. So see, even here in Florida, we're talking about some pretty intense sightings. I wonder if there's any down south in Dade County where I used to live, down in Dade. Oh, well, there's one actually fairly recent, February 19th of 2001. It looks like. No, sorry. Excuse me. No, it's that's when it was added like to the list. It was March 71 and 72. A possible Bigfoot runs into a car. That was down in Dade County, Florida. So, folks, see, there's a lot of strange things out there.
If you're enjoying all this rare and unique content, please show your support by subscribing and leaving comments.